And Virginia's embattled Democratic Governor Ralph Northam is still in office after his party spent the weekend calling for him to resign. Calls that are continuing today.
This has been so offensive and hateful, and the racism that it harkens back to, it's the only choice available to him right now.
He can act most honorably at this point by stepping aside.
This is not about him. This is about what's in the best interest of the Commonwealth, and he should step away from that job.
We begin this hour with the president, no doubt looking for glimmers of hope in CNN's new polling out today as he prepares for his second State of the Union address tomorrow night. Everyone in the House chamber will be listening intently for what he'll say about border security and immigration, since we could be less than 2 weeks away from another government shutdown over the border wall. CNN's latest polling shows a very slight uptick in the president's approval rating since the partial shutdown, from 37% to 40%. But he is still underwater, as they say in the polling biz. Many more disapprove, 55% to be exact. After the survey, after the 35-day stalemate that left 800,000 workers without a paycheck. And when it comes to voters' views on how the president is handling immigration, it's within the margin of error, but 43% of registered voters now say they approve, compared with 40% before the shutdown. Let's get straight to CNN's Abby Phillip joining us from the White House. Abby, you know, some presidents say that they don't look at poll numbers. This president doesn't even pretend to say that. He's very, very focused on his ratings, as he calls them. What are you hearing from the White House about CNN's numbers?
That's absolutely right, Dana. This is a president who is often looking at his approval ratings to determine where he is on some of these issues. But on this particular issue, he has consistently been underwater. This idea of the border wall has not been particularly popular with the overall public. But as you can see, opening the government brought the president back to a more stable place, around 40% in his overall approval rating. The question is, what is that going to tell him about how he should proceed next? Over the last several days, President Trump has made it very clear that his position on the wall hasn't changed. He hasn't softened on it. He hasn't moved from the place where he has been all along, which is that he wants a border wall. And if he doesn't get it, he said he's keeping a national emergency on the table as an option and another shutdown as an option. And one of the reasons for that could be another statistic in our CNN poll, which shows that a very healthy majority of conservative Republicans back him up on shutting down the government if he does not get his border wall. So, as always with President Trump, the question is he listening to his base, or is he looking at these broader approval rating numbers of the broader American public, which show that not as much support for this fight for the border wall, and they also show more support for him when the government is open, when the government is working as it should be. As we go into the State of the Union address tomorrow, President Trump has teased a potential announcement when it comes to the wall, but clearly he's getting frustrated with what's going on Capitol Hill and has been talking repeatedly about basically using the power of the pen to go around Congress and get his wall if Nancy Pelosi doesn't give him what he's been asking for weeks and months now. Dana?
Abby, thank you so much for that report. Here with me at the table to share their reporting and insights, Michael Bender with the Wall Street Journal, Sungmin Kim with the Washington Post, CNN's Caitlin Collins, and Annie Linsky, also with the Washington Post. Hi, everybody. Hi. Everyone feeling okay after partying last night? We'll get to that, I'm sure. You did at least, Annie. We'll get to that later in the show. But I want to pick up on something that Abby said, which is the robust numbers for the president, not just on the border wall, but on a shutdown if the border wall issue doesn't get resolved in the president's favor. Take a look at this. 71% of Republicans support a shutdown if no wall funding. Okay, that's one thing. Pretty strong. But look at the number of independents. 40% of independents say they agree with that. Of course, 13% of Democrats. I wonder who those 13% are. But the 40% of independents in the middle of your screen there, that is something that really is striking to me, because those are the people who the Trump White House, the Trump political team, they were worried might go away. Democrats were banking on them going away over the shutdown. And he doesn't have a majority, but he has more than maybe one would expect.
Yeah, you're seeing an uptick in his general approval rating as well. Not a huge increase, but
within the margin of error
since the shutdown. Yeah, and I do think that is going to be something that they're focusing on before that speech tomorrow night, because this is a second chance the president has had in recent weeks to make a primetime televised address on immigration, making his argument for this border wall. And I think if they do it successfully tomorrow night, they could see that as something that could help them over the next few weeks if the president does make that decision to declare a national emergency, because that's what they've been really working with, the messaging with this 3-week committee conference, trying to find a legislative solution to this. They think that even if they don't and the president does declare a national emergency, that they'll have support on their side because they make it look like they've exhausted all options to try to get the border wall built legislatively. And,
you know, there also is some polling, though, that Republicans have lost ground on the border, which I found quite interesting. The Washington Post did a poll earlier in the last few days that showed Democrats amazingly had a slight edge among Americans. Believe that Democrats slight edge on how they would handle immigration, which is something that Democrats traditionally have had, you know, been down by 9 points. So there is quite a lot of turmoil right now on that issue, and I think that you're right that the president is going to want to sort of recapture it, because it would be quite concerning to see Democrats suddenly, especially since they haven't offered any kind of plan whatsoever. But if Americans are beginning to think, wow, Democrats might do a better job with it.
You know, you mentioned that Democrats haven't offered a plan. That's a really important point, and it has gotten a little bit lost in the fact that, you know, there was such a robust political fight over on the president's terms, on what he wants.
Yeah.
And if it had gone on longer, perhaps more discussion would have happened over, well, what are the Democrats offering? Having said that, let's look at in CNN's new polling about the president, but also Nancy Pelosi, and how she is faring right now after everything that's gone on since she's regained the speakership. Pre-shutdown, Donald Trump 41%, Nancy Pelosi 34%. Now, Donald Trump 44%, Nancy Pelosi 41%. That's a significant jump. That is way outside the margin of error. And if I might just add, our polling director, Jenna Justice, said that she went back, and that's the highest favorability rating for Nancy Pelosi since April of 2007, since she first took the speaker's gavel.
Those are pretty remarkable statistics. But recall what was going on before the shutdown. She was grappling for votes to become speaker. There are a lot of stories out there and a lot of voices from the Democratic Party saying this is why she should step aside. Obviously, that would have an impact on the voters' minds. But look what she did during the shutdown. She did a lot of things that would be considered a win on her terms. Remember, it was Nancy Pelosi who decided, much to some confusion of even her own leadership, to essentially disinvite the president from the State of the Union since it was since it's held in the House chamber. And the president actually acquiesced to that, which is a surprising loss for a president who doesn't like to admit defeat. And clearly, the government opened back up again without money for the border wall. So Nancy Pelosi has really gained some ground among the Democratic base. Some members who question whether she should still be the speaker, and among, you know, the public writ large.
I think it's a really big jump for Pelosi, but it's also important to kind of pull back the scope on these poll numbers and look at the broader importance. One is, these are good numbers for Pelosi, but these are good numbers for any speaker. Paul Ryan spent his term as House Speaker in the 30s. John Boehner spent his term in the 20s and teens. So that's a real significant number for Pelosi, not just for herself, but also in the broader context of Washington. The Trump-Pelosi dynamic isn't just important for this immigration debate. It's going to be the predominant political in Washington for the next 2 years.
Yeah, and none of those Republican speakers had the millions, tens of millions of dollars spent against them, demonizing them the way she did. Okay, let's turn to sort of the heart and the substance. I want to talk about polling. It's important. This is inside politics. Now let's drill down on the substance of what we expect the president will do tomorrow night, and even if it's not tomorrow night, broadly about this national emergency, whether he will try to get around Congress. Very conflicting bits of advice that he's getting from his television counsel, which is how he does spend a lot of his time watching his friends and so on television. First, let's start with Rick Scott, the senator from Florida.
This is not a political issue. This is what all Americans want. So if I was the president, I'd sit there and say, what are my options? If Congress won't do their job, then if he has the power, then he should use the power to fund the border security. And I think on top of that, he ought to take care of DACA kids.
Okay, so that looked like a green light to say, you know, forget about us here in Congress from the newly elected senator from Florida. Then let's look at what Governor Chris Christie said. He is somebody who has a book out about the sort of ups and downs that he's had with the president since they were friends and then working and helping him on his campaign. Here's the advice he had for Mr. Trump.
But I think everybody realistically knows in the back of their mind that it's not going to happen. And I don't think that Republicans in the Senate would permit it to happen, even if the president wanted to. The president would then have to defy Republicans in the Senate and Democrats in the House. I just don't think he's going to do that because I don't think it's practical, and I don't think it'll get him what he wants ultimately. Now, the national emergency thing, you know, is a real jump ball in terms of the legal strategy and whether or not a court will endorse his ability to do that.
So that's what he's hearing from his advisors on television. What are you hearing from your sources, Caitlin?
This is the thing. The White House knows they're going to face legal challenges if the president declares a national emergency and bypasses Congress to build this wall. But that's kind of the point for them. They want it to be a win for the president. Some of them don't even actually think the wall should be built, but they know the president wants a win here. That's why they've been negotiating with Democrats over the shutdown, and they were willing to take less than that $5.7 billion, but Democrats would never put a number on the table. They want the president to be able to walk away and say he's got a win here. And they think, and I've been talking with multiple people who speak with the president about this, and I said, what is your reaction going to be when this automatically goes into some kind of legal challenge? It goes to court. They said, that's fine, because then we look like we've done everything we can to fulfill the president's promise. Exactly. And that'll be a fight that we're willing to have over the next 2 years when the president is trying to get reelected.
That's right. And you see on your screen, Christie, national emergency won't get Trump what he wants, which is the border wall, when you look at the substance, but what he wants and what he needs is to save face more than political win. He needs to not have, be able to say he didn't disappoint his base and everybody else who he promised. Okay, everybody stand by, because up next, the big question for Virginia's embattled governor is, will he stay or will he go?